something like an impromptu theme song for this series. I don't know really what to do because it's totally off the cuff. And but it's something like that. I have a theme song for all the other series. I've got even a book theme song and the different It's been a while since I played it. Something like that. Anyway, I'm going to get back to my chair because this is Journey of an Aesthete podcast, and this is the third episode in a new series that I've commenced with embarking upon a discussion of all about aesthetics. Now, of course, all is a bit of a what should we call it? Kind of a be a little careful because you can never really be totally comprehensive. There's always going to be inconsistencies and gaps and missing ideas that will come to me at 4 a.m, and all that. And so, of course, that's all to be expected. And maybe as time goes on, we'll work it into the proceedings here. But this is the third episode, and if you have been following this Journey of Aesthete podcast series all about aesthetics, the previous 2 episodes, you will note that they were very heavy on visual information and sometimes auditory information and music, but a lot of film clips and things like that, and discussion of painting and some. I even did some performance related things, I think. But anyhow, this the reason I mention all that is because we're going to go in this episode. It's going to be so many books, so little time. Is the theme of this episode, or can you judge a book by its cover, or ought to? And what about a book's innards, and all this? So we're going to talk about books. I'm going to try to get to at least 2 aspects of book culture, literary culture, and that is, of course, prose style, the aesthetics of prose, written text, matters related to that. And of course, the actual covers of books, because I have a cover on here. I have this should say something about the dress that I'm wearing today. This is one of my favorite items of clothing that I own, and that's for a couple of reasons. Is that unlike those more loud sport coats that I was talking about that Fred Astaire actually wore, and I am lucky to wear, that is the cloth, the pattern, it's not the same jackets. Those were a very, very, some would call, I guess could call them loud, or they call attention to themselves. And, my favorite clothing is clothing that's more plain, like this. This is a winter version of what I have fall and winter version of what I have spring, summer, kind of a closest you could get to the most dressy garment. Now, even though, I'm not wearing it with the matching trousers so that it's not a full suit or even a full dinner suit. You can break them up. And I designed this particular clothes that way. You can break them up and break them apart, which of course is a design issue of how to organize one's wardrobe, one's sartorial armor in facing the world, perhaps, or something like that. And so I always want to start off with that. And this is tie was given to me by a Facebook friend named Neil. He knows a lot about menswear, and he sold me this Turnbull and Asser tie. I can't ascertain the date of it. I'm going to guess. I don't know. It's a fairly wide one, so it could be late 70s. I don't know. Or it could be, even early 90s. I don't know. I don't know the actual date, but I know it is Turnbull and Asser, and this is all except for the tie bespoke, and that is clothing that's made by individual tailors or a team of tailors or a single tailor, and not, purely machines, which is bespoke mass market clothing. Now, in future episodes, when I make a promise, I always want to fulfill the promise. I want to say to you that I promise I'm going to talk about different ranges of clothing, because I don't just wear, I'm going to discuss made to order clothing. And this is clothing, very, very, I should say, excellent clothing. I won't say it is good as full bespoke, but it's approaching that quality by some of the great firms in the US and abroad, and a couple things. So I'm going to show things that are sort of a mixture of machine and handwork. And so I'll talk a little bit about that in the future. Sort of a note to self, reminder to myself to bring that up or bring examples. So before we start, I'm going to read the fair use disclaimer, because this is a fair use show. The longer I do this show, the more I realize that I've been actually interested in doing something that is hopefully highly educational and sort of pedagogical, a little bit. And so I'm going to read this. So fair use. This is section 107, and I love this, of the Copyright Act of 1976. Bicentennial year. Amazing. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, research. It is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Recognize the fair use of copyrighted content. Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act states, quote, notwithstanding the provisions of Section 108 and 106A, the fair use of a copyrighted work, including such use by reproduction and copies of phone records or any other means specified by that section for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research, we already went through that, I think, is not an infringement of copyright, unquote. And so that's a mouthful, unquote. The legalese of that brings to mind an issue that we're going to confront head on in this very episode, and that's the nature of prose styles and prose uses. Because what I just read there is a kind of a language. It's a technical language, and it was devised over, maybe hundreds. I want to say more than hundreds of years, because these kinds of things have ancient roots sometimes, and classical scholarship, so long periods of time, and it's transmitted, and there are both, of course, secular as well as church or origins of a lot of this stuff, and of course languages like Latin and Greek and all that. And so that's all in this, hovering around in the backgrounds and in the shadows, or of this mouthful that I just read, this fair use disclaimer. And so it's interesting to reflect upon prose and what prose is for. But I talked about judging a book by its cover, which is an old expression from the 20th century, mid to late 20th century. People would say, do not judge a book by its cover. And so we're not going to necessarily judge books by their cover, but we are going to note their covers, because some of the covers are, well, you'll see, because it depends on what kind of book we're talking about. So what do we got here? This is two books about Warhol that I happen to be fortunate to include in my book collection, such as it is. And the first book I'm going to show you is a book by Bob Colacello, who worked with Warhol. And it's his biography of Warhol. And the book is called Holy Terror, Andy Warhol Close Up. That's less important than what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you the book's cover. This is a book cover. Can you guess what decade this book came out in with a cover like that? See the strips of how many Depeche Mode records, Men at Work records, Kate Bush? I don't know. I don't know all those groups. I'm not an expert. Frankie Says Relax. Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Manhattan Transfer. Remember them? The vocal have covers kind of like that with those colors. And there's, yeah, this is an 80s book. And even when you go in, you see the jacket here. See those little. These are aesthetic design details that publishers wanted to use. And you know, when you encounter a work of art from an era, this is always gonna happen. And this to me is a source of astonishment sometimes and marvel, maybe sometimes regret or chagrin, you know, depending on who you are looking at it, what you're looking at. Everything made carries its era inside of it and on it. All the things from an era. So we're always going to be dealing with historical time and periodization. And this is very much an 80s cover. In the 80s, they liked these kinds of shades, you know, right? Blake Gottlieb's book on Warhol. That's what, a couple years old? Now, they made a nod to that. As you can see here, they remembered that some of those same shades. So there's a nod to the retro, but there's no mistaking this as a contemporary sort of doorstop dictionary weight and heft book. You know, it's thick, and you have that serious photo of Warhol doing his thing, sitting on a chair. Right? You see this a lot now. You see in biographies now. There's the last photo of Warhol waving that flag, one of the many publicity shots of him. There's wonderful Blake Gottlieb, who we've been fortunate to have on our show. I'm only showing you these books to sort of bring us to the bring us to the consciousness of style, or the consciousness of design, visual design and style. We have not yet dealt with the inside of a book at all. We're just dealing with book covers, right? So this is also from the 80s. There's that same yellow, right? Same peaches and that what is that, aquamarine? I don't know what that, turquoise. This is a book by someone who I studied with so I had a class with Cynthia Heimel, who I think at the time when she wrote this book, I'm trying to remember. She was either a columnist. Oh, I'm confusing two different women. I'm sorry. So Cynthia Heimel was a columnist, wrote a column for Playboy in the 80s. And I think Marcia Paley wrote for Penthouse. So, you know, again, I've dealt with sort of adult entertainment type magazines, retro magazines on this show before. And, you know, I showed the inside of what they look like, but these are two columnists. But, you know, this is Cynthia Heimel's book, and they compare her to Dorothy Parker. But again, let's look at the date on this thing. This is 1990. So that's an interesting thing. So I guess I said 80s, but you know, there is an overlap between sort of the early 90s, of course, and the 80s, because he's, you know, when you get a whole regime, a change in order, a change in era, a change in regime, you know, you get everything that comes with it, you know, and it hangs around for a while, you know, an era doesn't disappear. I mean, there's a certain school of thought that says that eras never really die completely, you know, they leave their trace. And so we're dealing with the aesthetics of covers. Now, here's a book about books, about actually one bookstore in particular. This is Bookstore. Now, this book by Lynn Tillman is about Jeanette Watson in Books and Company. This is how they decided. Look at that little, see that drawing? That's one of those famous, God, there's so many famous, not Hirschfeld, but Saul Steinberg. Yeah, Saul Steinberg, New Yorker type. So they knew what they were doing. They knew that they would have Saul Steinberg on the cover, who they knew they would know Saul Steinberg's work from the New Yorker and the New York Times, you know, his idiosyncratic way of doing lines. And there's, of course, a picture of lovely, one-of-a-kind Jeanette Watson in front of her store. I love this photograph. And there's a quote from Arthur Schlesinger Jr. about how much he loves this bookstore. Now, I should say, if we're discussing bookstores, that I think my love for Books and Company might have happened after my Gotham Book Mart experience. So my dad introduced me, first of all, in the early to mid 70s to Francis Steloff's Gotham Book Mart, which was on 47th Street. And that was a very kind of a really handcrafted sort of. Frances Steloff, I think, died in the hundreds. I think 105 or something, somewhere in there. And she was a kind of a free-thinking woman and a lover of literature. And she hung out with, was friends with, like, say, Henry Miller and Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Gregory Corso, and people like that, of that kind of, Paul Bowles, you know, Jane Bowles, the playwright, his wife. Of course, he was a decent composer as well. But, you know, folks like that. So 30s, 40s, 50s. I only mention that because I had memories of well, my dad wrote about Frances Steloff. He was quite, I think Frances Steloff was actually a big influence on my dad's animal rights interests, because I think they came to it separately, or they were both involved in that at that time. And so I would go in the store and she would always be there, in the same way that Jeanette Watson here would always be at her store. And one was, of course, 47th Street. This is interesting. So the reason why I spend so much time on this book is because this book really represents an era. So what year was this book published? Let's see here. It was published after Lynn Tillman wrote her very, was it The Hunger? I'm trying to think of what her, yeah, Lynn Tillman. She wrote a book on the Warhol's factory as well, Lynn Tillman. Absence Makes the Heart, I think, cast in doubt of some of her works. But I'm just gonna notice the pages. Notice how beautiful these pages are. By which I mean they're sturdy and they're not flimsy. You know, they're not. So this is 1999. This is the Y2K. This is the right. 99 is like the very end of that era that I've talked about of late so much. You know, from the Chuck Klosterman book, the 90s. So this is like kind of when I look at this book, or when I open up this book, look at the people in it. There's Fran Lebowitz there in the corner, and some other luminaries there. There's what do we got here? Roy Blount Jr. Any of you read Roy Blount Jr.? His book Rednecks. There's her and Salman Rushdie, Susan Sontag. There's a line up there. My point is that this was an entire milieu. Like having photographs like that in a book that someone would buy. That's like a thing. That's like a thing, like going to a club and hearing musicians play. You know, that's like a phenomenon. And of course, I don't want to get, into the question of how much of that remains. But of course, the big story of our current moment is that we want to get away from objects in space that take up space and put everything. So it's putting all your eggs in one basket. We want to kind of download everything, and if possible, into the smallest thing, so that that you have a little, we can put everything in here or put everything in that. And that's a project that, it's so simple. I mean, that's a project that only exists because folks that want that and believe in it run the world. It's that, and they have the power. So they say, well, let's all do this. I'm not saying that people, the masses don't necessarily like the idea as well, or think that but I'm saying, it's always that way. It's sort of like, and that changes that's different than having like books that you have to lug around. And so there's a philosophic issue, which is that the trajectory of our current moment is about wanting to be liberated, in quotes, from volume and mass. I don't mean me, because I actually love objects in volume and mass, so I'm not including this. I'm just trying to understand other points of view. Just a drag having to have a body and to be physical and carry things around, and it's just a drag, right? There's a part of certain people or many people to liberation from the heaviness and darkness of that into weightlessness, light, electricity, the internet. And so that's the impulse. But of course, that impulse, what do you do with all these books, Some of which I don't know if we can get to all of them in this one episode. But then, you also have books like this. Now, this is a book that's a film book. It's not meant to be like read, And it's filled with pictures, This is by somebody named Rebecca Horn, and it's you have stills from the film. You can. This is a still from the film. It's like about some kind of sanitarium. You'll notice Donald Sutherland there in the white coat. We're back to him. Yeah, Donald Sutherland gave an interview magazine about working with Rebecca Horn. Buster Keaton's bedroom, I guess. But this is a book, it's a little bit like the America by the Jean Baudrillard. It's wide, and it's a book you kind of open up, and you sort of, it takes up space. It has volume and mass, and it's solid. There's solidity to it. And, that's part of what, because I wanted to go from the outside in. Now we're going to go more inner. We dealt with the covers. So those are all book covers, and I have a lot of books here we could choose from to discuss some of these things. But, I want to take a drink of this Think coffee here and from New York. I got this cup in New York, and it Okay. I don't really know how to proceed. I guess I could. I'm getting out these grammar books. I have a few of them. This is the most recent one. This is Virginia Tufte's book, Artful Sentences. See, I got this book for its title. It says syntax as style. So like me, she thinks syntax is content, at least in terms of writing, and is everything. And I like that. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it's not everything, but it's close to everything. And this is like got tons of examples, and I thought that would be fun. Now, Richard Lanham had a book, style book. This is called Style and Anti-Textbook, and this is a really valuable resource. Of course, I would recommend, above all, Brian Garner's Dictionary of Modern. Is it Modern English Usage or American? I think American Usage. I don't know. I have him over there somewhere. Brian Garner, of course, is a law. Bringing this back to the front of our episode, a law technical. Brian Garner's on our dream list. I just haven't written him the letter yet, because writing Brian Garner a letter, the grammar of my letter. I mean, it's some serious business. I mean, it's a bit like having a dream episode would be John McWhorter, who I also very much like. John McWhorter, currently writing about these matters, and Brian Garner on the same show. That would be great. But I think we should start from the Sontag, or this is our guide to this series. And so in future episodes, I'm going to deal with visual things again. I have to deal with Bresson. Now, the reason why I have to isn't so much that he's just really worthy of many episodes, of course, in discussion, but because Sontag, he occupies such a central place in this Sontag's text and in her entire career. I mean, she was very, very knowledgeable about Bresson, and she understood him better than most, I feel. But that's a note to self. In the future, we're going to have to deal with Pickpocket and Mouchette and Four Nights of a Dreamer, my favorite film of his, and L'Argent, and these kinds of things, But I didn't quite know. I mean, it's time to talk about prose. Now, this is a text against interpretation that's actually has built in a certain formal structuring principle. It's sort of, it's like when I write music. So all my music is tonal. It's rarely, I mean, in my youth, I was forced to write non-tonally because that was the mode and the practice then, and what was all around me. I mean, and I explored that a little bit, but I eventually decided on tonality. But in tonality could be what it could be that, which isn't really what you think of, because it's not. That's about using harmonic language based on thirds and perfect intervals, and think of it as color. That's very different, than functional harmony, which is more what we think of as like, even when you do colorful things like that. You have to come back to them. It's that. Everything's moving towards something. traditional tonality. But not that first thing I played. It is tonal, but it's not traditional, because it's not, you're sort of creating music that's free or liberated, right, would be the word, from its functional. It's actually freed from narrative, or a certain kind of narration or narrative. It's about colors, and of course the cats who did that were the French, the Debussy and Ravel, and there were, of course, many African American musicians in the 20th century who, the two that come to mind, of course, there are many, but John Coltrane and Miles Davis, and last week I think I talked about Stephen Sondheim, and Stephen Sondheim is interested in vamps and ostinatos as color, so that the vamp or the accompaniment becomes the lead. It's sort of accompaniment as melody kind of thing, these kinds of ideas. Anyhow, these are all ways for composers to break free from, that kind of, those, I like both. I use both. It's, again, these things are not questions of objective right and wrong. They are questions of rules for a particular style. And so all that is a long-winded way of saying that Susan Sontag, when she writes my favorite essay, A Guest Interpretation, she got her start, I think for a period of time she was married to Philip Reif, I think, who was a very, I'll try to be, he had his drawbacks, of course, as a scholar, but he was very traditionalist. And then she starts embracing Jack Smith and Kenneth Anger and Agnes Varda, her and The Factory and all that. And so she's getting into different things, of course, in the 60s. But when you're writing an essay like A Guest Interpretation, you got to have the style fit. You have to have the style fit a tradition, which might mean bowing to precursors. So in a way, she's bowing to, and she's familiar with, so she's well read, and she's read good stuff, by which I mean Erasmus, okay? A. Philip Sidney's In Defense of Poesy or Poetry. Argument. Not argument the way that, not the way the word is used. So it doesn't mean, it's a kind of an artful way of presenting nonfiction. We're just dealing here with non-fictional prose. It's one kind of prose, right? So, see what she does here? See how it looks on the page? Let me get this. I need to do this. Put this up to the. Let me cover this up because I'm trying to. Well, you get the picture. So it's numbered. So 7. 8. So there are terms for this, like aperçu, epigram, things like that. It's a mode of presentation. It's a style, but it's also an entire worldview. So when you enter this essay and on style after it and a couple of other ones, her essay on Bresson, you are literally entering a worldview which she is artificially constructing for us to consider, to contemplate, to take from it what is valuable, and discard what is not. That's our role. So she's offering this text to us, as J.L. Austin says, what doing things with words was his essay. J.L. Austin, the British, how to do things with words was his essay. Words are objects to do things with. In doing that, you're creating emotions, like in music, in a potential audience. So I've been putting off too long. Let's just deal with this. Now, okay. What is important now is to recover our senses. We must learn to see more, to hear more, to feel more. Feel is italicized. Feel more. There's no universe where, I'm trying to find the right words, right? It's not possible for any author, Susan Sontag or anybody else, to write a phrase like that in any era other than the 60s. I mean, I guess you might see it some other time, but you're in 1966, baby. When you're that's like Norman O'Brown, Life Against Death, and Love's Body, and well, that's 70s, but it's all one. I mean, you're in it's a different. I mean, that's a thing. So let's see if she continues. It's the end of the essay, right? Our task is not to find the maximum amount of content in a work of art, much less to squeeze more content out of the work that is already there. So Susan Sontag is already attacking thinking in terms of content. So she's completely opposed to our contemporary era without having lived in it. It's interesting, right? That's why I said in an early episode, she's sort of lost and her nominal opponents sort of kind of won the day, which is interesting, right? Our task is to cut back content so that we can see the thing at all. Okay. The aim of all commentary on art now should be to make works of art, and by analogy, our own experience, more rather than less real to us. The function of criticism should be to show how it is what it is, even that it is what it is, rather than to show what it means. And then drum roll 10, her last sentence that people have been debating about and arguing with for decades since. Number 10 is, in place of a hermeneutics, we need an erotics of art. In place of hermeneutics, we need an erotics of art. Okay. That's what she says. So that's why, I don't know. It's a worldview. You're in her worldview, right? I talked about transparency in the last episode. Kind of transparency is sort of seeing the thing itself. So that's why, I've got all these books here, and that's why I hold up this. I hate to keep inflicting this cover on the world. I mean, it's a cover, but it's publisher decided to do this cover. Now, if we opened it up, this is from an essay she wrote in the 80s called The Hidden Life of Women Who Run with Dogs. What are we here? I didn't know I was going to be reading this, but I saw it. Glasses Time, the small little print. It's a kind of a book thing. Bear with me. I'm just trying to. "8:11 a.m. She starts. "I am awakened by the feeling of many tons on my face. Some tons snake into my nostrils. Some vigorously clean my ears. I feel a large paw on my head. I open my eyes warily. It is only the dogs. 'Wake up,' they all cry. 'Wake up and let's go to the cupboard of the kitchen where you keep the chopped dead animal.' I consider going back to sleep, but they have been peeing on the carpet lately in their wildish ways. I sit up in bed. Pandemonium ensues. 'Yes, yes,' they all cry, 'you are awake. This is the most fabulous thing that has ever happened in the history of time.' 'You really love me, don't you?' I coo as I lead them into the yard." And then she puts into parentheses here, "You may wonder at my fluency in dog language. I took a course in Wicca at the nail salon on 16th Street. Suddenly the mysteries of the canine kingdom were unlocked before me. You are our new mother,' they say. When we were puppies, we licked our mother's face and she would vomit up food for us. When we lick your face, you go to the magic cupboard. You keep us infantilized. If you'd only let us hunt with you, we would grow up." This is an old argument. I mean, that's just one little piece in this book. You know, that's why I guess there's a book on the cover. And even that's one book. Where are we here? Sentences. Henry James. This is the novel Portrait of a Lady. And I'm going to really go there. I'm going to really discuss the famous chapter 19. It's the discussion between a couple characters in this book. And, we're going to go there. So it's a long chapter, it is Henry James. Now, I don't know if I should hold off on this and go to something a little more. Oh, I know what I do. I'll read from this. They'll discuss it a little bit, and then I'll pick something utterly contemporary, by which I mean, I don't know, written this year, written in 2023. And just kind of look at the differences or similarities. That might be fun. But, this is about this woman that is traveling, and she's what is she doing here? She's met this very mysterious woman named Madame Merrill, and she's an expatriate living abroad, of course, and so the thing about this chapter is the ideas discussed in it, the philosophic ideas, And because it's so long, I can't or won't read all of this, but I want to get to some central. So Madame Merrill and Isabel Archer, who's our protagonist, she's the hero of this novel, and things happen to her. She marries a very, very bad, unsuitable person. And she has great problems in life, but she's also a dreamer and has integrity, and there's a lot I could say about it. That's why it's a portrait of her. But she's talking with Madame Merle, and Madame Merle comes from a whole. Madame Merle ain't American. She's called Madame Merle, right? I mean, you have to say Madame when you refer to her. She comes from a whole different scene, So I mean, and it's just them talking, and so. Gotta find the right moment. I guess I'll start with Madame Merle. I'll start with Isabel's the remark Isabel Archer makes to set off Madame Merle. They're talking about different people, and she's saying, well, this person has no castle and the Apennines. And then the other one says, well, what has he? An ugly brick house in 40th Street? Don't tell me that. I refuse to recognize that as an ideal. And that's Madame Merle saying, I refuse to recognize some. So basically, Madame Merle is saying, forget about this guy. He has this ugly brick house, And Isabel Archer does the thing every heroine, indeed every hero in every contemporary movie, even some good ones I've seen, does the I don't care about that, meaning I want things not for their money, but for their, She says, I don't care anything about his house, said Isabel. Madame Merle says, that's very crude of you. When you've lived as long as I, you'll see that every human being has his shell, and that you must take the shell into account. By the shell, I mean the whole envelope of circumstances. There's no such thing as an isolated man or woman. We're each of us made up of some cluster of appurtenances. What should we call our self? Where does it begin? Where does it end? It overflows into everything that belongs to us, and then it flows back again. I know a large part of myself is in the clothes I choose to wear. I have a great respect for things. Oneself for other people is one's expression of oneself, and one's house, one's furniture, one's garments, the books one reads, the company one keeps. These things are all expressive. Now, this is the narrator, not dialogue. This is, I guess, Henry James or Isabel Archer. This is kind of a little bit. This was very metaphysical, not more so, however, than several observations Madame Merle had already made. Isabel was fond of metaphysics, but was unable to accompany her friend into this bold analysis of the human personality. I don't agree with you. I think it's just the other way. I don't know whether I succeed in expressing myself, but I know that nothing else expresses me. Nothing that belongs to me is any measure of me. Everything's, on the contrary, a limit, a barrier, and a perfectly arbitrary one. Certainly the clothes, which, as you say, I choose to wear, don't express me, and heaven forbid they should. Heaven forbid they should. These damn clothes express me. No. You dress very well, Madame Merle lightly interposed. Possibly. But I don't care to be judged by that. My clothes may express the dressmaker, but they don't express me. To begin with, it's not my own choice that I wear them. They're imposed upon me by society. Should you prefer to go without them? Madame Merle inquired in a tone which virtually terminated the discussion. So that's the famous dialogue scene from Portrait of a Lady. And, and of course, in its, very real sense, that scene is a debate between two people. They don't even have to be two women, just two people that millions of people have been having up till now. What's more important, what you feel inside that you should express or you have an obligation to express, the real you, or artificial laws, which are, which keep everybody orderly and, all these kind of old arguments that will continue. And, I'm a pluralist. So what I would say to that is the only reason why there's a discussion is that people feel differently about this and have, in other words, that people feel very strongly one way or the other, and they carry that strength of value into their lives. And they're going to run into people who all the time who don't share that, don't share that. I'm going to run into people who don't read much, a lot of people, and I'm not going to have much to speak with them. I'm really not going to have much commonality with them. I don't say there'll be no commonality, but not much, and, that's just one example. I'm going to meet a nuclear physicist, and I will not know what the hell that person's talking about because I don't know nuclear physics. I don't know I don't know the language. I don't know there's just so many things in life like that. And one of the goals of aesthetics or artwork is to kind of be a mediator in a way, or a medium amongst all these differences. And so you could have a novel about a nuclear engineer and get inside the mind of a nuclear engineer, and you hope that the person reading it doesn't know anything about physics or science, and they're reading it. Or you could have a novel about a woman escaping the US for Europe, like this novel, and encountering, initially great excitement and wonder and possibility, but also encountering her own ruin, at the end. So it's interesting, right? So that's the thing. And so prose is no different. So I read this I won't say very polemical, but Susan Sontag's text is, we need to feel more. We need to hear more. This is almost a rhapsodic language overflowing from her very modernist 20th century, preferences, kind of like Andre Bazin, the French film critic, or like her favorite Roland Barthes, very precise. That precision is, but in the midst of that precision, she says, I want to feel more. I want us to hear more. That's like almost like a cry, it's almost like she's in this text. And one of the wonderful things about a guest interpretation is that text has both in it, both impulses in it. And so that's kind of, so it'd be nice to pick something kind of new. Now, this is a book novel called Nothing Special. Now, the title of this novel, does it come from Suzuki Roshi, who said in the published talks from 1971 at the San Francisco Zen Center called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, when Shunryo Suzuki says, our practice is nothing special. That's what he says, just nothing special. He says that more than once, I think. No big deal is what he says. That's what he says. So maybe that comes from that, or maybe, I don't know. But see this book cover here? See, this is very popular now. Very popular now for books to include illustrations like that. Like maybe this artist, wanted to have, It's about this girl, and she is a girl. She's a teenager who she escapes, I think, a boring life in part of New York City to work for Andy Warhol as Andy Warhol's typist. It's amazing. And she meets, and then it's about her experiences, right? And it's really, I'm just searching here because I don't know. It occurs to me that I'm maybe going about this in the wrong way because I should read something contemporary that's nonfiction. This is fiction. So, I didn't really, I don't know. Well, yeah, we'll just read from it. This is Nicole Flattery. I was going to say Sally Rooney, but no, it's Nicole Flattery. And this is this now in a novel like this, you have like headings like this. 2010, beautiful town. And so we're very much at the contest. I'd be interesting to read. It's the narrator of this novel is looking back to the 60s, right, when they were a teenager. And now they're in 2010. So I think that's kind of interesting. So this is just one brief part of the book. So in the mid-1990s, when my mother and I still weren't speaking, I became fixated on the farm book. I was having some personal problems, which, like all difficult people, I believe could be traced directly back to my relationship with my mother. Was I caring enough? Was I responsible? The answer to both of these questions was no, and it was probably because my mother hadn't read to me enough as a child. So see, we're back to books again, the importance of reading. This character saying, my mother didn't read to me, reading books, right? So then I remembered the farm book. The internet was newly available to me, and I searched for information. Eventually, I emailed the publishing company responsible. I considered this a highly productive act, a spiritual mission, and I thought I owed it to her. People were still getting to grips with email then. There were articles and magazines I subscribed to. How do you send an email? How to receive an email? Etiquette. Helping us to learn a language we didn't yet understand. Say hello, kiss somebody's ass, say goodbye. All best. Computers still sat fat and white in front rooms where the owners could keep an eye on them. I knew the keyboard instinctively. I like to think we recognize each other at once. I think at first the publishing company, alarmed by the amount of emails I sent, every 5 minutes or so a new email burst out of me like a shrieking mechanical bird from a cuckoo clock. A new email, a new idea, a new vision. I can only picture the recipient of my emails as a girl in her early 20s, no older. I imagined her with a neat desk, combed hair, more sophisticated than I was at that age, a healthy, freckled complexion from an educational trip to Europe. All of this effort belied an internal disorder, a gloomy impatience. I told her that my mother had adored the farm book. I never knew where she acquired it. I deliberately used the word acquired to set the tone. Acquired. This new language made everything sound hollow. In my second email, I asked what year the farm book had been published and who had been involved. In my third email, I argued that it wasn't strange for a person to love a book. The makers of the farm book, were they still alive? Couldn't have known the spell they were going to cast on my proud mother's heart when they grouped the animals together in this particular formation, when they dreamt those worn-faced sheep and set them down. In those early days of my emailing, I felt the emptiness of my apartment like a punch. I'd had a number of worthwhile relationships in my life, but now I couldn't fall in love like I used to. What was there to do instead? What to do with all that energy and focus? Collecting, shopping. There seemed to be a lot of rooms in my home, and I had a desire to fill them all. My possessions would smile at me with a new camaraderie. While I waited for a reply to my emails, I visited websites that were designed to appeal to me, an easily seduced woman in her mid-40s. I guess I didn't know what to do with my time. I'd lost control of that. I needed furniture that I could maneuver around the room for hours. I needed appropriate trousers and blouses to sit and type in. It was essential that I look like a typist, gray, unforgiving, and forgettable, a role I had once played so effectively. So that's kind of a passage of just someone in the present looking back and dealing with this new technology, this new email. And so there's a rhythm to that. So in that passage, it's very, so it's like she's saying, but what was there to do? I did this. And then she's lists of things. My mind felt this way. My mother felt this way. She smoked constantly. One evening I told them, she was hysterical about it. So it's unsavory types wheeze by. It's an accumulative list of sort of things in the world or descriptions of a person. And the reason chiefly why she's doing that is that it's somebody's voice. And that's presumably how many people think to themselves, possibly. I mean, there could be many other things, but that's at least one guess on my part. But that leads to a style. But this whole novel has that quality. And that's a quality. You know. That's a quality. Here's another example. Some rude bitch applied. Somebody she's written to, I don't know. They think they can't see their personality through formal language, but you can. You know, by their clipped and arrogant tone. People want you to crawl on your hands and knees, even through the computer. They want you to beg. I continued typing. See, it's that. I'm going to the store. I wanted to buy some milk. The man behind the counter, weirded me out. I felt bloated. So I just improvised a passage. So I did this and I did this and I did this. That's a way of writing. That's a style unto itself, right? That's a style unto itself. Style. So this is what Richard Lanham says. He says that Americans, he calls Americans blind to style. So they're style blind, like being tone deaf or being blind, visually blind, right? And this is what Lanham says. He says the reason why is that Americans think ideas are more important than words. That words are something you have to, God, we have to use these awful words to get through to the pure idea. It's like some words are something to overcome to get to an essence that's the most important. So we're back to the Susan Sontag idea of surface appearance and then inside, trivial and important. So he says that I propose an alternative goal. He says, not clarity, but a self-conscious pleasure in words. Such self-consciousness is the only stylistic attitude likely to last beyond the classroom. Not clarity, but attention must come first. Only such a therapy will compensate for the literary tradition that even literate Americans do not possess. Only such self-consciousness will equip Americans to cope with the verbiage that surrounds them, to banquet off the nonsense. What we have now is a tedious, repetitive, unoriginal body of dogma, clarity, sincerity, plainness, duty, tarted up, however, every week in a new disposable paperback dress. The dogma of clarity, as we shall see, is based on a false theory of knowledge. Its scorn of ornament on a misleading taxonomy of style. The frequent exhortations to sincerity on a naive theory of the self. And the unctuous moralizing on a Boy Scout didacticism. What can be taught is words, and they must be taught in the full matrix of human utterance, written and spoken, accompanied by a theory of style equally broad. So that's a kind of from his opening, and it's Richard. It's just one dude. This is Richard Lanham's thing, and of course he's going to do. Maybe it's predictable attack on E.B. White, Strunk and White. He's going to do his elements of style be damned, clarity be damned. Let's be expressive. Let's see words as ideas. Let's get away from. Let's get towards the word. That the word becomes its own thing. And after all, with books, what we have are words on a page, right? So maybe words are important after all, at least in this context that we're discussing it now. So I think I'm going to conclude now with an excerpt from an older book. I don't know what. I like to just pick random things and see what happens. Now, John Updike, this is a 70s book, 79, is going to be using in this passage things from his era, or that era. So we just heard from, Nicole Flattery using things from her era of emails back and forth, and I see through your professional prose, and, reflected upon her mother. Now we're going to see a different era here. It's hard to. I'm going to start from the beginning. So we're in 1979 now in this novel. And so what is the first thing that anybody talks about? Chapter 1, running out of gas. Rabbit thinks as he stands behind the summer dusty windows of the Spring Motors display room, watching the traffic go by on Route 111. Traffic somehow thin and scared compared to what it used to be. The fucking world is running out of gas, but they won't catch him. Not yet, because there isn't a piece of junk on the road gets better mileage than his Toyotas. With lower service costs, read Consumer Reports, April issue. That's all he has to tell the people when they come in, and come in they do. The people out there are getting frantic. They know the great American ride is ending. Gas lines at 99.9 cents a gallon, and 90% of these stations to be closed for the weekend. The governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania calling for $5 minimum sales to stop the panicky top it up. And truckers who can't get diesel shooting at their own trucks. There was an incident right here in Diamond County along the Pointsville Pike. People are going wild. The dollars are going rotten. They shell out like there's no tomorrow. He tells them when they buy a Toyota, they're turning their dollars into yen. And they believe him. 112 units now and turned and moved in the first months of 1979 with 8 Corollas, 5 Coronas, including a luxury edition wagon, and that Celex, the Charlie, that's like a pitmobile, unloaded on those first 3 days of June already, at an average gross markup of $800 per sale. Rabbit is rich. Now that's a opening of this novel. You're pretty much at the point of view of this person at this time. There's not really a lot of distance between us and what's been given to us, This list of cars, and this discussion of gas and all this kind of thing. It's just It's a very different way to write than Nicole, Nicole Flattery's like, um, at the start of every school year, there was a dance performance. It was in the spirit of good cheer, as most of us were from poor, hopeless families. Several of the girls had the drained pallor of the sleepless, some already substituting in the family home for mothers who were long gone. I was alone in my dislike for the dance performance. It was pious. The teacher seemed too pleased by it, as if they were rewarding us for our terrible home lives by letting us prance around on stage. The boys just watched. Maud told me she still had an interest in rescuing me then. That was because I didn't know how to enjoy myself. I said she had no capacity for original thought. The dance performance was the only excitement we got. It's a description of something like a car lot. It's a description by a person, but it's a different person, a different different gender, a different sex, a different locale, but there are also a lot of similarities. So one of the similarities is we're hearing from a voice that's utilizing the materials of the world. So dance performance, right? A hall monitor, right? Or a teacher. He's using like materials from his world of like a car dealership and like, car lines. It's sort of like, that's like that, all that stuff is like stuff in the world. And so what a writer has to do then is they have to deal with, what am I, if I have the materials for the world, what am I going to do with those materials? And how am I going to inhabit those materials? Am I going to inhabit those materials as, I could tell you that, this person in this book is in the world, but as they're in it, they're set apart from it. Almost as if it wasn't made for them, maybe made against them. That's very, I'm not saying that's not the only thing the novel's about, but that's colors everything. It's a little bit of a distance, and there's kind of an emotional thing there. This is like somebody who's gusto, like I got this great car dealership. This is somebody with very little, no separation. They're like, I'm reading Consumer Reports every day. I need to know. So this is somebody in a world that was partly made for him, I guess, and maybe to which he's very accustomed, and for with which he's very comfortable. And this is like, of course, there's a larger question of the author on top of the author. There's John Updike is totally separate from all of it, right? As is Nicole Flattery's looking at I'm looking at this world of the 60s and school dances, and these are all translated into words on a page. So sentences and paragraphs and syntax. I do not have the time now to get into all the details of all of that, maybe in future episodes, but I just wanted to do an episode where we deal with books and words in books. And I want to thank you for joining me. And maybe you got something out of that, Journey of Anesthete. And in a week, we're going to have a 70s show. It's my longest show I've done yet. It's 2.5 hour long show. The Lawn 70s podcast. Guests on my show. So look for that and some other surprise pop-ups. I'm going to do a pop-up pretty soon on Twitter and on Instagram and a couple other places. You never know. But thank you and have a great weekend.